Good evening, morning, afternoon, night, whenever you find it most convenient to listen to this iteration of Quickfire. I, as always, am Alan, the Pole with the Gold, joined by my lovely jubbly co-hosts DJ, Tim, as well as our editor-in-chief, Alex. As we mentioned in our last episode, we are going to do a quickfire whenever, well, something quick happens that needs to be addressed, as well as our reactions to what is to be addressed. And that news is, of course, Georg Heitz. He's gone-ish. He's leaving. He's pretty much leaving. So, lads, as a little intro, what was your initial visceral reaction to getting the news that Georg Heitz will be moving on after this season?
I made my coworker be like, "What the heck are you doing?" while we were grabbing euros from the vault. I just started saying, "This is awesome," and he was just looking at me like, "What are you doing?"
Why did you make it sound like your bank is Gringotts somehow?
You don't know what Florida's like, Tim. You don't know what we got down here.
Fair enough.
We need some protection from the Gators.
All right. Tim, what was your reaction, I guess, to hearing the news?
Honestly, I think that just like pretty much everyone else, I was just surprised by it. Obviously, it comes very late in the window, and we'll talk about the implications for that later. But, I think that Mansueto buying the team was like a ray of hope, and then that hope sort of faded the longer the team stuck with the strategy that wasn't working on the pitch, and Georg Heitz was the architect of that. So I think that now it just feels like hope is back, even if it doesn't necessarily have immediate implications.
All right. Alex, what was your initial thought?
Yeah, I mean, you pretty much nailed it on the head there. I guess obviously when I got the email notification, I was a little bit surprised. I didn't expect it would come now at this moment in the summer before the windows even closed. I think still a third almost of the season left. It's a little bit surprising that they would at least even announce it now. I wouldn't have been shocked if they had made the decision. He had made the decision that he was going to step aside at the end of the season, even if they had determined that internally. I'm a little bit surprised that they're announcing it this early. But I think, yes, you can feel however you want about the decision for Heitz to move on as sporting director, but making the decision now in mid-August gives the team at least 3 months before the end of the season to find a successor in his position. And if you recall, when Heitz was first hired, it was when Mansueto first took over full control of the team. And I believe Veljko Paunovic as head coach wasn't even fired until like November 12th or something like that, somewhere in that range.
There was only a month between Heitz and Pano, yeah.
Right, and Heitz took over, I want to say it was December 20th. So the fact that now, instead of having a month before preseason starts to throw everything together, hopefully they'll have a full off season with a new sporting director if that search if they're able to get somebody in time for the end of the season, which the global search, as the club have said, has kicked off. So we'll see where that leads them.
Yeah, and I think we're going to talk about how global that search may or may not be in a little bit, but it's certainly also on top of giving a new sporting director hire a potentially longer runway. They do have a more congested roster, which we'll get into, but the other side of it as well is that Mansueto and whoever is helping him with this search, which actually honestly seems like it may include Heitz at some level, certainly have a lot more time than they did last time to bring someone in.
Yeah, I mean, sort of like what Alex said, it was a bit surprising that they just did it now. But as we were talking about earlier, the club we spoke in episodes previous before the summer started that Shaqiri would probably not come back wearing a fire shirt, and the fact that we couldn't get that done across the door, there's just there's not any room to really do anything, I guess. Yeah. So
that was always going to be though on Shaqiri. His contract is such that whenever you sign a new deal, we've talked about this, your existing deal is null and void unless it's a trade within MLS. And he is just making so much money compared to what another team would offer him that he would have to basically be saying, no to millions of dollars in lifetime earnings by moving to a different club. If he was willing to do that to get a fresh start somewhere and get, playing time with a new team, that would be something the team would have let him do. But I mean, it was always going to have to be his decision to make that happen because there's no way the Fire could move him on once it became clear that the second buyout wasn't happening.
Well, I wonder who gave him that contract.
With Shaqiri as well, the other thing, his national team career is done, right? He's retired from the national team. So at this point for him now, the only motivation is, well, get that contract. And if you have any personal ambitions to do anything individually, maybe find a new challenge or whatever. But it's not like he has an urgency to find a new club where he's going to play, where he's going to thrive. That's not the most important thing anymore, because when he came to Chicago from Lyon, it was a case of, I'm going to go there, I'm going to play every week, I'm going to get a lot of minutes before the World Cup and then the Euros eventually. That motivation's not necessarily there anymore. We don't know. I don't know how that's going to impact things for him individually going forward, but it's not like he has an urgency to find a new team. So he's probably very happy to see out that contract. And unless somebody comes in the next couple of days with what I can only say is a monster contract offer, he's probably going to end up staying.
Which leads to the question, is he going to actually play, or is it going to be a repeat of Jairo Torres, essentially?
That's literally the only leverage the team has to try to encourage him to move, is to say, like, look, if you want to stick out your contract, we can let you do that, but we will not be giving you playing time. So if you want to play, then you should get a deal somewhere else now. But those discussions would have happened. It would have been Heitz kind of in the captain's chair for those discussions. And it still will be for the rest of the season because he's not gone yet.
That's true. And he isn't going to be like completely gone from our, I guess, line of sight, considering that he's going to be, the club still said that Heitz will remain in his position as a member of the board of directors at FC Lugano and will play a key role in the relationship between the two clubs. So technically, a string will be still attached between him and the Fire. So he won't be completely gone. But we've said so many like negative things about Heitz and how his tenure at the Fire has essentially played out. But there have been some good moments or things that could be linked to him as well. One thing was the emphasis on the Fire Academy and developing like players like here as like Fire 2, homegrown players, that kind of thing. That was one thing that you could sort of say he helped with. So, I mean, I guess there's a few positives from his time here.
Yeah, I mean, the academy thing, the other side of that too is also other MLS teams had reserve squads that were playing mostly in USL. The Fire were not one of those. He basically had to spin a MLS Next Pro team out of nothing. And they've been fairly successful and done a fairly good job. I mean, he's had a significant budget doing that, a budget that a lot of other technical directors or sporting directors in the league would kill for. But I mean, on the academy side, bringing in Gary Lewis, I think was, Alex, we haven't really talked about this in the pod, but like, I think that represented a major coup when Heitz was able to bring him into the Fire Academy.
Yeah, and I think the academy, even in the last 2 years, has made a huge jump. I mean, if you look at the academy players who are coming into the second team as well, they're a huge different level to where they were 2 years ago. I mean, look at it this way. 2 years ago, the academy was so much of a mess that players were leaving left, right, and center. There are several guys who have MLS contracts, MLS Next Pro contracts at different MLS teams who were with the Fire 25 months ago. Gio Villa, Leo Orejarena, Marius Ainero, floating around, all these very talented young players who just left the Fire at that time. And things have completely flipped on their head because the decision to bring in Lewis was a big boost, but just overall, with a similar level of talent, the academy is back to where it should be. And I'd say it's definitely top 8, top 7 academy in MLS right now. And you're seeing
poised
the
to take a
rewards of
bigger
that.
jump, you'd think, once the new training center opens, just in terms of the visibility it has of prospective players.
Right, and you're seeing the rewards already. In the U15s won the national championship, and one of the best young talents in the U.S. was on that team. And the second team is now full of players from the academy. It's actually insane how the last couple of games, guys like Christopher Cupps, he's becoming one of the more important players in that team, top center back prospect. Chase Nagel's coming into that team now as a 6, as an 08. Vitaly Hliut is scoring goals and starting as an 08. Like, we're talking about it, one of the youngest teams in MLS Next Pro, and that is because of the progress made with the academy. So you can say what you will about the performance of the first team, and that's very valid criticism. But when you look at the organization, the club as a whole, a lot of things are moving in the right direction, and I think Heitz does deserve credit for some of that.
The other thing that he did that I think he's been very successful at is MLS had sold American talent to Europe for years. And I mean, that has been going on for a very long time. But MLS had not really been a development league for non-American talent, a stepping stone to make it to teams in Europe for players that were not American until really around the time that Heitz came in. And he has been one of the most successful general managers, sporting directors, whatever the title is, in the league at that, selling guys like John Duran on. I mean, getting names, and that's a major selling point, I think, in the long run for like what it means for the ability to sell your club as a destination for potential signings, right? I mean, like Frankowski, right? Like he was sold for not that much money, really, all things considered, but like he was sold to a club where he ended up playing Champions League football and being a starter on a team that was in the Champions League.
Yeah, and during his time at the Fire, he slowly began, he kept developing, and when he made his move to Europe, he became a starter like almost game in, game out for the Polish national team.
Right. So, and so the ability to tell a in-prime European guy like Frankowski, come to MLS, it's not the end of your career. It is a step in your career to the next step that may not be right there for you, which would have been, one of those like Liga or like Bundesliga clubs. And the ability to sell an MLS team as being an appropriate step for an in-prime European or South American player that still had European ambitions, I think is not an easy prospect to sell, but it's something that Heitz was able to do a couple of times, and it'll just get easier from here because of those sort of like prototype examples.
Amen, I say to that. So to sort of move the conversation further, what does Heitz leaving right now, since we mentioned that this is kind of a weird time of the season to be leaving? I personally expected if I personally thought he was going to leave like maybe end of last season or like beginning of this, well, maybe not beginning of this season, but like so that this season would already be someone different. But what is him leaving now sort of mean for the rest of the Fire season, whether it's the transfer window, this one, the next one, rest of the season?
So I really don't think it means a lot for this season because kind of at this point, yes, they're only 3 points out of a playoff spot, but it does feel like we're heading toward another season that's just kind of a lost season. Not really any progress toward next season, to be honest. I mean, I think that the signings made in the last offseason do set up the team fairly well for the future. I still think that the offseason was very good before this season. They've been unlucky in some ways with injuries, but I do think the players that were brought in have set up the team well for the future. I think at this point now, you're going to see them play out the season. They probably won't make the playoffs, but even if they do, I can't imagine they'll go very far. But yeah, I don't think it really means much. I think you'll see a search happening in the background, and the word search, you can interpret it how you like. There are certainly people they're looking at, but I think there will be a plan in place by the off season, and I think things are moving in the right direction. But in terms of product on the field, this is heading toward just a lost year because
I think if anything,
hard to imagine that things will change. Like the transfer window closes on Wednesday. That's not gonna. It's very unlikely unless something changes on the domestic market at the last minute that anything's gonna happen.
So it was unlikely that the Fire were going to make a move this window anyways because of the status of the roster. I think that the chance of that went down with this news because that it's someone that's not going to be in the role next year, and it would potentially be just restricting the roster flexibility for whoever the next person was in that job.
But I would like to reiterate though, I know this has been a really bad season for the Fire, and I was very critical of it when I said this is going to be a lost year, by the looks of it. But I want to reiterate, the off season was still very good. It was still an A+ off season. Like where the roster was before to where the roster was at the start of this season, bringing in Kuipers, Acosta, Haile Selassie permanently, Aragoni, Gutman, Sahlquist. Every single one of those players, I maintain, was an upgrade. It's just that for whatever reason, the team hasn't been able to take that next step yet. But the moves in the offseason did set up the team for success in the future. There's just more work to do.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's the problem is that by that point, I mean, every player going into the 2024 season was signed by or re-signed by Heitz. Like you got guys like Fabian Herbers that were given new contracts under Heitz. So to the extent the roster was in a hole, it's a hole that Heitz himself dug or was at least managing the diggers. Wasn't able to climb out of that hole, it seems, in that one off season. And like you do have to put that on his shoulders. But at the same time, you know, I asked him before the season started what he learned in his time in MLS. And he said one of the things was how long it takes you to move on from mistakes. And I think that that's something that we saw where there are still mistakes from earlier in his tenure that are continuing to hamstring the Fire's roster building ability, that are sticking with the team and potentially will be for a while unless whoever replaces Heitz is able to get very creative and resourceful in ways that we haven't seen from the team recently.
In ways that we see from almost no team in MLS ever, unless you're Chris Albright, pretty much.
Chris Albright's done it. You know, Garth Lagerwey has done a decent job at it. Like there are examples of teams that have been able to turn over rosters very quickly. And there's teams like FC Cincinnati.
The point is, unless you're poaching a big name domestically, you're not going to find someone who's going to be able to, within the constraints of MLS, turn the whole thing around overnight.
Yeah, I mean, FC Cincinnati were able to turn around, but part of that was like finding talent that they already had and had access to. Part of it was finding very underrated talent domestically and basically being able to like bring it in and flip it, like what we saw with Brandon Vasquez, who was not a heralded player, really in his time in Atlanta, and then in FC Cincinnati was, you know, able to become a huge name and make his way onto Rayados after that. But you need to basically have a couple of home runs. And I think what we saw from the team in the offseason was we saw some like solid doubles. We haven't seen home runs.
Yeah. And you need to score runs in order to move forward, I guess. All right. So, you know, we talked about remaining the season. For the future, you know, we talked about the search, as Alex mentioned, however you like to interpret it, whether it's going to be another hiring firm or something like that.
My understanding is that isn't the primary plan for how they are getting candidates in. There may be like a search team that does that as a part of what's going on, but it won't be the decision-making process as it was last time, where basically it's like here's some names and pick from these names, which is the way that the Fire got Heitz.
I mean, look, I will say there's one name to keep an eye on. By no means anything that's concrete at all, but just a name to keep an eye on because it's been discussed for months at this point, is Greg Berhalter, who left as U.S. men's national team head coach after the Copa America failure. The reason I say to keep an eye on him is because heading into Copa America, there was kind of a consensus that if it did go south in the way that it ended up going, that he might be out of that job. He lives in Chicago. He's not going anywhere for now. Yes, there are other MLS teams interested, but it's just something to keep an eye on. It's something, he does have relationships with people in the organization, so it's something to keep an eye on for sure. I know it's been discussed kind of passively, but just watch that space, I guess.
And something that we can say is that there were discussions when Berhalter was in between USMNT head coaching contracts after the 2022 World Cup before he was rehired, between the Fire and Berhalter. So that
Right.
they know where each other are. Like they've got each other's phone numbers. And yeah, you would think that would be a contact. Now, I mean, some of the teams that I think have also been linked with Berhalter include like Atlanta and teams like that. Atlanta right now would probably it's probably the biggest vacant head coaching job.
I think Atlanta's probably the front runner for him right now too.
But I think that the difference is that Atlanta would just be offering a head coaching job, whereas the Fire would be willing to offer potentially, we're talking about a front office role. And I think the question is that a front office and head coach role or one or the other? But the fact that the Fire could offer the ability to build a roster, which is the next step in some ways in a career and potentially more interesting to some coaches. I mean, less interesting to others, obviously. And we have no idea if Berhalter really wants that side of a job as well. But that's the one thing the Fire could offer is here's the keys to the car. And with Joe Mansueto paying for it, it's a very expensive car.
Right. And I'd say Berhalter, he's someone, as everybody knows, he's had interest from bigger clubs in Chicago before. He was interviewed by Club America. If he wasn't rehired in June of 2023, he would have been the America coach in Liga MX. That's the biggest team in possibly the Americas. So
it's the biggest team, and it's certainly like the northern half of the Americas without.
It's the biggest team in Mexico for sure. Point is, it's a very big team, and if you're going to try to get him to the Fire, yes, his stock took a big hit with his second stint as USMNT head coach, but you're going to need to sell him on that. Even if he likes living in Chicago, you're still going to need to sell him on that. But look, the relationships do exist. Frank Klopas, Joe Mansueto, they know each other, right? Put it bluntly. It's Chicago. These guys have crossed paths before. Berhalter and Klopas were national teammates, for crying out loud. They went to a Copa America together. Look, obviously, like I said, conversations exist. Things happen. We don't know where he's going to go yet. It's all up in the air. Berhalter, despite his USMNT failure in his second stint, which was just a nightmarish 10 months for him, he's still a very good coach. In MLS, I think he'd be very good right now. He's a much better coach tactically, and I think personnel-wise than he was when he was with the Crew 6 years ago.
And he was good. Like, the thing is, like, don't look at the Crew's record and assume that that's what Berhalter is capable of as coach, because that was when the Crew had different ownership, and he was basically given a like nickel and dime, scratch and dent sort of squad budget.
Will Trapp was the key player on that team, if you want some perspective on it. And he got them deep into the playoffs in his last season. And the only thing we don't know is Greg Berhalter building a roster. We've never seen him do it because in Columbus, he wasn't in charge of that. With the national team, you're picking from a selected pool. But what we do know is he's a good recruiter, because one of his biggest wins as USMNT head coach, Serginho Dest, Yunus Musa, Ricardo Pepi, Georgi Mihailovic, the list goes on. All these guys, he ensured they were going to play for the United States and not other national teams. Tillman, forgot Malik Tillman. So having him now, there you go. That's one feather in his cap for sure that does translate to the club game, is on the transfer
And that's
market.
something that has been a major issue under the Fire is closing those deals down and selling them on the project of coming to Chicago. So
because Greg Berhalter is someone who people, players, media overseas actually would know from his time as national team head coach. Georg Heitz did have success in Switzerland. He had a decent resume, but if he's the guy in the negotiating room with a player, they don't necessarily know who he is. There's a much better chance they know who Greg Berhalter is, and he can be on that negotiating table as head coach and sporting director. And I think that's a big boost on the transfer market when you look at the way things are running these days.
And obviously he has a good relationship with a great number of USMNT players, some of whom are not really in the best of situations with their clubs in Europe right now. So it's not beyond the realm of possibility that, Greg Berhalter could be announced as a Chicago Fire sporting director and Weston McKennie or a name like that would come to the Fire not long afterwards.
Not McKennie, but like...
It's not the craziest thing. Crazier things have happened, but there's a ton of names right now in the USMNT pool that are not in good club situations. And the ability to bring a couple of them over would both be a commercial boon for the Fire, given the U.S. men's national team's ability to like those names to sell tickets, and potentially a major sporting contribution as well to the roster.
What news to, I guess, start your day or end your day, possibly whenever this episode is coming out, coming after not even, I want to say, a few days since Pedro Grifol got fired from the White Sox. So few changes when it comes to Chicago management. So I guess I'm happy.
Hopefully
on both
for the
ends.
better.
Hopefully for the better.
You had to bring up the White Sox. Now, like, all the positive vibes we were talking about are just gone, man. Like,
I'm sorry. I just wanted to say that this is not the first change in terms of the. Okay, I'm gonna just stop.
So
now.
if we're setting the bar at the White Sox, like, luckily that is a bar the Fire will probably clear.
No, we definitely clear the bar that is the current 2024 Chicago White Sox clubhouse situation. Like that's they're in a league of their own down in Bridgeport. So yeah. All right, gentlemen, any last words of remarks, words of wisdom about Georg Heitz leaving before we live our ladies and gentlemen and they thems of the Fire?
Just Auf Wiedersehen, goodbye, I guess.
The offseason just got even more interesting.
I mean, as always, keep an eye on your social media feeds. Maybe there'll be more in the coming days that we will have to say or share. So
true. Look out for MIR97 pods, as well as the website meninred97.com for any updates. We'll definitely have some articles from like these two guys right here as I point to Alex and Tim. So yeah, no, keep an eye out. But hopefully a turn in the right direction, we say. All right. As I show thumbs up to the cameras and everyone smiles and nods. Yay!
We're very great at this audio medium.
Maybe one day we'll do video podcasts as well and more video content, hopefully.
And then we'll look boring on camera in addition to the issues with the audio format. Yeah,
this is fantastic.
But does that mean I have to wear pants now?
Well, I mean, considering you only see the upper bodies of us, you wouldn't have to.
Well, we could always have a special edition for OnlyFans, I guess.
Yes, and also Feet Finder for Matt when he comes back eventually. All right, this quick fire took a turn. So I, as always, have been Alan the Pole with the Gold, joined by Alex, Tim, and DJ. From now until forever, come on, you men in red.